Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Friday morning. I'm back with my good sparring partner, Samuel Luckhurst. We're going to look ahead to the game on Saturday afternoon against Southampton, and we'll get into a bit more of a general section in the second part. Look at Ten Hag's comments on Cristiano Ronaldo, as I'm sure you've all seen during the week. But first of all, Samuel, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
You can tell in my voice, I'm very well. The sun is out. Early kickoff on a Saturday. I always like that because if you're not at the game, which I'm not, it's you and Ty going down to the South Coast on Saturday, you've got your Saturday evening. And then, of course, we're off on Sunday. So I'm looking forward to a very pleasant weekend, I think. Should we just get straight into it then? The team news. Ugarte is available. He played for Uruguay on Tuesday night. So that's interesting whether he'll start or not. We'll get into that. But Rasmus Højlund and Luke Shaw are still unavailable. I was hoping Højlund would be back. I think they've actually quite missed him, to be honest, in the opening weeks of this season. But they're still out. What have you thought of that? Would you make any changes? What are your general thoughts ahead of the game on Saturday?
It would be remiss of them not to make any changes after the last performance and result against Liverpool. I don't think there's certainly not going to be wholesale changes. I think it could even be reduced to maybe one or two. Ten Hag does like continuity, even though there's clearly an issue there after having just played against Liverpool and played as poorly as they did against them. But they have got quite a few players who weren't on international duty this month. It's always a factor, isn't it, with South American players when they've gone away. When they come back, do you put them straight back into the team? And the early kickoff is a bit of a problem. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I wasn't at the press conference yesterday. It was Ty who went for us, and Ten Hag said that Ugarte was the only one who got back on Thursday, whereas everyone else was back on Wednesday. And of course, that applies to a couple of other South American players who would have been back on Wednesday. You can't see Ugarte in the training imagery from Thursday's session. It doesn't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone asked why Ugarte came back late. I suppose, given that he played on Tuesday, you'd expect him to be back in the country on Wednesday and then train on Thursday. So he'll have only had one team training session this week, provided he's fit and doesn't suffer a setback or an injury at all today. And there is an element of risk of putting a player straight into the team, particularly a new signing he'll have had two training sessions, I think, going into this game with his new teammates. But the risk is possibly greater not to start him because the alternative is primarily Casemiro. I think it's a very big ask for Toby Collier, who's not started a professional game and is still finding his feet at senior level, to go into the starting 11. But it is an issue that Ugarte has come back seemingly a little bit later than expected, as Ten Hag outlined, and also that it is a 12:30 kickoff. And not only is it a 12:30 kickoff, but it's at the other end of the country for United, which is another issue altogether, in that they did raise it on the fans forum last season, that they've spoken to the Premier League about some really inconsiderate away kickoff times, particularly towards the end of last season, with Brentford away on Easter Saturday evening, Chelsea away 8:15 on a Thursday, Crystal Palace, that was a bank holiday Monday kickoff at 8 p.m. All of those away games really inconsiderate towards supporters. And what's happened this season, they've just been roughshod over United again with the schedule. Brighton away was 12:30 on the Saturday. Southampton away is 12:30 on the Saturday. The fans clearly never come into the conversation with the rights holders. So it's clearly not an excuse as to how United will perform this weekend, but it is from a logistic standpoint anyway. It is an issue that could have a bearing on Ten Hag selections. Beyond that, I think that there is a case to drop Alejandro Garnacho just because of his idle thumbs again on social media. It's the second time it's happened this year, and you can't keep on saying that he's immature. He's been at Manchester United for 4 years. He's a father. He should know better than that. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think that came up in the press conference yesterday. So it's probably just blown over. But given Marcus Rashford, who I thought harshly got some stick off quite a fair few United fans against Liverpool, the match goers that is, given that he actually did create 2 clear-cut chances for them, and Ahmad was bright when he came on, that there are a couple of excuses there for Ten Hag to make that one change to the front 4.
Ugarte obviously played the full 90 minutes for Uruguay on Tuesday night. I kind of was looking at the timings and the time difference. It was 11 p.m. in obviously English time, British summer time, that the game was kicking off at. They were a couple hours behind, so I think it was 6 o'clock. If you left South America, I presume Wednesday night, that's probably what it sounds like if he's come back Thursday. And you're definitely right, I suspected he'd have one training session under his belt heading into that game. Having said that, I'd still like him to start. We all saw what happened with Casemiro against Liverpool now 2 weeks ago. It's been a long international break. It almost feels longer than that. I think you've just got to throw him in. You've obviously got the option of Toby Collier there, very highly rated within the club. He had that, came on the second half against Liverpool, and it was always going to be tough for Collier to show himself, but I thought he did okay in the circumstances. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops. I think maybe start Ugarte, bring Collier on after an hour. I think that would be the sensible thing to do if his legs aren't holding up. Ugarte. It's interesting, you've obviously brought up Garnacho there. I think that's kind of went under the radar, isn't it, Samuel? That he liked that post about Ronaldo. I don't think that post, correct me if I'm wrong, is as bad as the one that he liked in April. It was when we were driving back from the Bournemouth game, wasn't it? Yeah, so I'd actually started.
Ten Hag did give him a talking to about that. United were quite quick to address that rather than letting it go on. And in fairness to them, I think there were some bigger issues to address yesterday, and the Garnacho thing just kind of like fell by the wayside. So it's probably blown over without it really blowing up. In particular, just by them not being able to actually address it or have to address it.
So if you're saying take Garnacho out of the team, if that hadn't happened, would you have started him with Rashford on the left, obviously, I presume?
No, I'd have probably gone with Ahmad on the right and Garnacho on the left. I think despite Ten Hag's position, the authority has always got to be with the manager. And when you've got a 20-year-old, again, on social media, potentially undermining him, you've got to set an example there. And look, Garnacho didn't get dropped last year. Ten Hag dealt with it in-house, dealt with it well. He probably felt like he couldn't do without Garnacho at that point. So I was looking at the next game after that Bournemouth game was the FA Cup semi-final against Coventry. And he just wasn't trusting Ahmad at that point as well. And there weren't many other alternatives to play on the wing. He has got a different option this time because he does actually start Ahmad, even though he didn't against Liverpool, which I thought was a mistake. But I know it looks a bit of flip-flopping there, but I genuinely feel that the manager has got to retain total authority, and the slightest sign that he's not in an authoritative position, which is certainly an issue with Ten Hag anyway. It does. There is the potential for more rancor down the line, but it's clearly going to be two of those three that we've just mentioned. I mean, Anthony doesn't even come into the equation whatsoever. When we spoke to Dan Ashworth a couple of weeks ago, he said that they've got 4 good wingers, and nobody interjected because it would have been impolite. But I don't think a single person, any of us journalists, I think there were 12 of us around that table, heard that and silently agreed with him, because Anthony is one of those 4, but he's not getting a kick at the moment. It wouldn't be a surprise if he doesn't get a kick at Southampton either.
It's just been a cameo, hasn't it, against Brighton? It's one appearance out of the 3, and you just can't see him getting back into the team. You really can't. I would have actually started Rashford regardless on the left. I think his performance against Liverpool wasn't as bad as people made out, really. A lot was made of it, and I know there were boos when Rashford was kept on the pitch. But I mean, he created 2 big chances. On another day, he probably has 2 assists. And you've just got to, I think in this game, back him again, roll the dice again. It will get to a certain point when you will have to take him out of the team if Garnacho and Ahmad continue to perform as they are, because it feels like they have the momentum now. And Rashford's fighting to keep his place. And let's face it, he needs to do more, doesn't he? In terms of goals and assists, he's not took off yet. So, look, Southampton are relegation fodder. They're very toothless. They've been so poor yet to record a point. United really should be breezing past them. But then when I think about these games after the international break, when you think the momentum's been disrupted, you can probably just see United scraping past Southampton, couldn't you?
I certainly don't think they'll lose this weekend, but it's saying that it almost feels a little bit defeatist that we're going into these games and we still don't know what to expect from United because there's no consistent style, even though there were signs in pre-season, there were signs in the opening 2 games of some progress on that front where they did look a more competent side, and then they were utterly incompetent against Liverpool. Southampton they've lost all 3 games. They blew a really good chance up at Newcastle in the opening weekend where they had a man more for an hour, more or less. I think it would have been after it got sent off. It was Ben Brereton Diaz who got him sent off, but was it Shah or Botman?
Yeah,
Fabian
Fabian
Shah.
Shah.
Off for Newcastle. Fabian Shah, that's who it was. And they blew it that day. Then you look at Forest at home and losing that, I think, irrespective of whether you're a top team or a team that have got promoted via the playoffs, that's a bad result. And Brentford away, it seems like they got a bit of a pummeling there. Speaking to Son Peach, who of course is a renowned Southampton fan and will also be at the game tomorrow. But there are, you look at these omens for United that seem auspicious, and that Southampton haven't won a Premier League game since March 2023. They've not beaten United at St Mary's since August 2003, and that's the only time they've beaten United at the stadium since they moved there in 2001. United are unbeaten in 15 against Southampton. That said, 8 of those results did end in a draw. It's a strange one because although Southampton don't beat United very often, the games between them do tend to be tight, and the one game that wasn't tight was a complete freak, which of course was the 9-0 in February 2021, where Southampton had the players sent off after about 2 minutes, and it was again another of those freakish scorelines during the COVID era in the Premier League, which United were involved in a couple of them. 6-1 at home to Tottenham, 9-0 against Southampton being another. But I just get the sense with this game this weekend, I mean, we approach games covering United not expecting them to win easily ever. And you look at the games that they won last season, hardly any of them they won easily. They never meted out a thrashing, it felt like, even in a couple of the 3-0 wins they had. And they were good 3-0 wins away to Everton, at home to West Ham. There were caveats attached to those games. Everton battered them in the first half and United were 1-0 up, essentially without creating a chance. And when they beat West Ham at home, David Moyes said afterwards he felt West Ham played better than they did when they beat United at the London Stadium a couple of days before Christmas, which I completely agreed with. And they must have had 2 or 3 very, very good chances at key moments in that game. But United were uncharacteristically clinical in that, and also against Everton. So it would be good for United. It would be good for us, I think, as well, if we saw a completely unrecognisable United this weekend, because since, as I said to Ty the other day, since the 79th minute against Brighton, it has been a recognisable United for all the wrong reasons. Of bad game management, inexplicable substitutions, and added time defeat, the midfield not shielding the back 4 and getting humbled 3-0 at home.
Yeah, it was that sinking feeling for fans again during the international break. So it'd be so refreshing to see them come out, play against Southampton, be free-flowing, win the game by 2 or 3. But we just rarely see that with Erik ten Hag's United, unfortunately. So I won't hold my breath. If we look at the defence, actually, Samuel, because it is quite interesting. De Ligt had quite a poor international break. He made a mistake against Germany, lost the ball. He was hooked at half-time, so similar to Casemiro against Liverpool. Ronald Koeman came out and said, I needed to protect them. It was actually, I think the situation is quite similar to Harry Maguire, although when Maguire plays for his country, he performs, but there seems to be a lot of scrutiny around De Ligt in the Netherlands. And also, I've made the case, and I think you have as well, actually, during the break, that Dalot should return to right back, because we all know how good he was last season. He was incredibly consistent, and he played at right back for most of those appearances. He's obviously versatile and can play on the left, but he hasn't been as effective on that side. So I think return Dalot to the right back, put Mazraoui at left back, and I think that's sensible. And I'd obviously keep De Ligt in there as well, because if you take him out of the team, after what's happened with the Netherlands during the international break, that would be a big blow to his confidence, and that's just probably not going to happen, is it?
He played quite well for about half an hour, 35 minutes against Liverpool. As soon as Liverpool went 1-0 up, he was brought down to the level of all his other teammates, and he committed a pretty cynical foul on Luis Diaz in the second half as well, which was a certain yellow card. I don't think it strayed particularly close to red card. It was a bad foul, but it was the correct decision. And he's got away, and he's been very...
The Barclays trend on Twitter, that was a proper tackle.
This is the Gen Z description of Premier League. Some of us are old enough to remember the Premiership, but when it was called that, or Premier League years, right? Mario Melchiot as well. That's what you should do. You need to get your editing kit out and do a Mario Melchiot highlights reel. That would be, well, I think he'd probably start following you on Twitter if that was the case. But going back to his compatriot De Ligt, he was very self-critical as well after the Bosnia and Herzegovina game, where, I mean, I can't repeat the word really on here, but he said his performance was effed, to give it the shortened version. And then, of course, I think you'd have probably used that description a few days later after he's taken off at half-time against Germany. I mean, the Netherlands they beat Bosnia and Herzegovina, didn't then? I think was it a draw with Germany in midweek?
2-2, yeah.
2-2, wasn't it? So I was slightly surprised to see him start those games because he was fourth in the pecking order during the Euros. I know Stefan de Vrij has come out of the squad, and I don't quite understand why de Vrij was starting ahead of Mickey van der Ven at the Euros. I thought van der Ven was one of the best signings by a Premier League club last season, and he seems to have the essential attributes you would want in a centre back. He's quick, he's strong, he's good on the ball. Yeah, kind of similar to Jaap Stam in that sense, maybe not quite as physical. And going back to that Euro semi-final against England, that's probably what did it for the Netherlands, and that de Vrij actually stood off Ollie Watkins, and Watkins wins the semi-final. But De Ligt obviously got the nod for these two games. I suspect he won't get the nod for the next couple of games in the Nations League in October. But you look at his career of the last 5 years, it's not been, the trajectory hasn't been heading upwards. It's been going in the opposite direction quite gradually. And there's a reason why Ten Hag wanted him. He wanted him 2 years ago as well, as Ten Hag clarified in that Dutch interview with AD, I think it was earlier in the summer. So he clearly, trusts him a lot and likes him a lot. And he used Harry Maguire's mistake against Brighton for Danny Welbeck's goal as the excuse to put De Ligt in, and we knew that was always going to happen. But De Ligt he's still got a lot to prove, because he looked like one of the, I mean, he certainly was the most coveted defender in the world probably in 2019, and he only lasted 3 years at Juventus, then he only lasted 2 years at Bayern Munich, and he's got a 5-year contract at Manchester United, which I think all 5-year contracts United dole out are generous. I think it's the wrong strategy. I think they've got to, I know the whole amortization comes into it and PSR and spreading the cost of a player over a period of time, but De Ligt wasn't exactly a budget busting signing. And I think if you give a player a 4-year contract and you put maybe an incentive in that if United get top 4, it triggers an extra year or something like that, then that's a better way of going about it. But players can become too comfortable on long contracts, and De Ligt getting 5 years at United felt extremely generous for a player who clearly didn't cut it at Bayern Munich for 2 years, because they won the league by the skin of their teeth in the first season. They didn't win it by quite a distance in his second season, and they decided to cut their losses on him. So it's been a pretty tricky few years for him, to say the least. And there is no sporting institution on the planet where you are subjected to more scrutiny than United. So he's gone from one pretty intense pressure cooker environment at Bayern Munich to an even more intense pressure cooker environment at United, and we've seen how many players it's too hot for them. Just one example of a player coming from Germany, very different character, but Jadon Sancho, who was very much in his comfort zone at Dortmund, he could not hack it at United because there was too much pressure, and he had pretty pretty dismal spells in each of his 3 seasons for 3 pretty drastic reasons. But I think De Ligt is a better character than Sancho, and I think he's got better coping mechanisms, and he has been around the block already, and he has experienced football in different cultures, and hopefully that serves him well. But it's when you're struggling to have someone shield you during games, as he discovered against Liverpool, which was a pretty thankless task for him to be subjected to. But it's difficult, isn't it? It's going to Man United is not what it used to be. I mean, Yapsan got a real kicking when he joined United 26 years ago after Nicolas Anelka tore him apart in the Charity Shield. But that's because he was a world record signing for a defender at the time, and United had just had a trophyless season and finished second, which was a complete failure for them back then. Now it's almost seen as a success. But he was at least surrounded by winning personalities and players who would help him and on the way and would drive him on. And De Ligt doesn't have that. He doesn't have that benefit which he had at Juventus because he was entering a dressing room of serial winners, and he did have that benefit at Bayern Munich as well. So it's a really fascinating dynamic for him alone to have to cope with. But he is a senior player. He's not. I mean, he's not a youngster. If anyone dared write that he's a youngster and I was subbing it, that would be omitted immediately. So he's got to take some of the responsibility on himself. And I don't think he's got a problem with that, as we saw with his candid comments in the Netherlands. And hopefully he has a smoother afternoon this weekend against Southampton.
I think he's definitely got the personality for the job. I mean, you look at his CV and who he's played for at such a young age: Ajax, Juventus, Bayern Munich. He's only just turned 25. Yeah. It was his birthday, wasn't it, when he signed? Yes. 45 million, it seemed too good to be true almost, because it was such a reasonable fee for a player of his CV and what he's done and who he's played for. So it'll be fascinating to see how it develops in the next couple of months, because it's far too early to give a verdict. And I think it's a brilliant point you make about the dressing room that he's entering, because throughout his career, he's been at successful clubs who are competing for trophies with winners in the dressing room. United have won 2 trophies in 2 years, as Ten Hag keeps reminding us, but you don't think it's a winning dressing room at the moment. They're not competing at the top of the Premier League, and they are struggling in moments. So whether that affects him in his form, we'll have to see. There's been some promising signs, like you say, at the start against Liverpool. It looked quite good, but then it all went to pot, didn't it? I mean, he shouldn't have those problems against Southampton. As I say, they are very toothless, so I think he should have an easier afternoon on Saturday. We'll leave it there for part 1. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Now, this is the best part of the podcast, Samuel, because we get to take ourselves back to 2021, which has talked about Ronaldo and his return. Cristiano Ronaldo has been talking about Erik Ten Hag again. He obviously left United under a cloud in November 2022 after falling out with Ten Hag. He spoke on Rio Ferdinand's podcast, My Best Friend Rio. There was an embargo for that. I don't know if you saw, but it got broken. So thanks everyone for, I can't remember who was responsible. It might be an aggregator account before Romano did it, but the embargo was broken. Yeah. So yeah, that wasn't very good for.
I don't know why a PR would send quotes to an aggregator account. Very odd.
What's been your verdict on these quotes? I know when I read them, I probably thought Samuel's probably got something to say on this. I think you did a piece on Ronaldo as well, didn't you? So, I mean, he's kind of, has he had a pop at Ten Hag? Probably not. It wasn't really a pop, was it? And then Ten Hag responded in
it was.
Do you think? Yeah. And he could have definitely said a lot worse, in my opinion. And Ten Hag's had to go back at his press conference and said, look, he's in Saudi Arabia. He's entitled to his opinion, but he's very far away.
Yeah, and I don't think Ten Hag was going to pick a fight there, because Ronaldo's a United great and a legend. And I think he's always, just by virtue of what he achieved at the club, he's always likely to be held in higher esteem by supporters than Ten Hag will be. But the issue Ten Hag has got there is that when Ronaldo conducted that interview in November 2022, which was clearly grounds for divorce, and he wanted out as well, any right-minded or sound of mind United fan sided with Ten Hag over Ronaldo, and United very swiftly sorted it I mean, I think it was 9 days later that it was announced that Ronaldo had left the club. Ten Hag didn't speak to him, didn't need to speak to him. And at that point, United were on the up, and they were a better team without Ronaldo as well. As soon as they didn't qualify for the Champions League in the 21-22 season, Ronaldo had mentally checked out. He wanted to go to a team that was competing in the Champions League because that's the competition that he effectively monopolised at one point. As soon as he didn't get that move, it was pretty clear that his heart wasn't totally in it, and he abandoned his professionalism that time when he walked down the tunnel with the game going on against Tottenham. So that's obviously the key background, and it didn't happen that long ago, so people should remember it. Now, given that there's been some distance, and time is a great healer and what have you, and Ronaldo is pretty much irrelevant because he does play in Saudi Arabia, as Ten Hag said. He's probably the most recognisable athlete on the planet. He's got the widest following of any athlete on social media. He's the greatest game's greatest goal scorer. His opinion does carry weight, and there was a chance that it was liable to weigh Ten Hag down. But when he said about that the coach can't say this, he does have a point in that I don't think he's consciously saying it, but clearly there is an issue with Ten Hag in press conferences and how he comes across. From the open section yesterday, he didn't actually mention winning 2 trophies, which was just as well. I don't know if he did in the embargo section, but that is something that he needs to stop doing. And I think the thing the bugbear I had with what Ten Hag said yesterday was that he started talking about we're in transition, we have young players. If you're into your 3rd year at Manchester United, you cannot be using that word transition. And I know the hierarchy has changed. There's a new co-owner, a new co-chairman, what have you, but you cannot use that excuse. And that's why he's lucky to still be there, because to an extent he is correct in that they are rebuilding a squad that started with his rebuild 2 years ago. And there are very few managers who have the privilege of being able to oversee another rebuild when they are partly or heavily responsible for the recruitment during that point. The recruitment hasn't been good enough either. But look, Ten Hag's been realistic, and I think just Jim Ratcliffe was singing from a similar hymn sheet as well earlier in somebody spoke to, it might have been Bloomberg, I think, when he said that the title challenge was unlikely this season. So I get you've got to be realistic. As I said before the season started, I'd never say United can't win the Premier League title, because Leicester won it in 2016, and Derby won it that time in the 70s. Aston Villa won it in the 80s occasionally. Those Nottingham Forest in the late 70s as well. Those championship triumphs were way more freakish, or would be way more freakish than United win the title this season. United have spent more than £200 million again. They've spent I think they've committed to investing £625 million on players since Ten Hag took over. And I know they've been outspent by Chelsea as an example, but that is still a staggering amount of money. And reining in expectations, although it is realistic, I think there's a better way of going about about conducting your messaging or the way you get your message across. And I don't think, looking at the Ronaldo quotes, that I thought it was pretty clear that he was having a pop. Even the quote about Van Nistelrooy was, if Ten Hag listens to Ruud, maybe he can. Van Nistelrooy can help United. So there's never going to be any love lost there between those two, because of not just how it ended, but how they're working, just their whole working relationship. They were together for 3.5 months. Ronaldo was dropped after one start. He was dropped again in the October. He only scored 3 goals under Ten Hag. Only one of those was in the Premier League. And you had some strange situations there where Ten Hag said that time, after they got battered 6-0 at City, that he didn't bring Ronaldo on out of respect for his career, things like that. So it was a pretty eventful time covering United, as it always tends to be. But United were actually pretty good throughout that period, and that was primarily because Ronaldo wasn't a starter anymore. He was in his first season back, he was integral to to their wins that season. He got all their winners in the Champions League group stage. He got countless other winners. He got 2 hat-tricks. I still find this myth that, if he hadn't have signed, they might have been close to winning the title under Solskjaer. Complete nonsense. One, they did not have who was going to get the goals in that team that season? It wasn't going to be Cavani because he spent as much time in Uruguay as in Manchester. They can't rely on Rashford even now, 3 years down the line. They weren't going to be relying on Anthony Marshall as well. I know you cannot prove it, but that was always going to be an issue, even though I think Solskjaer said in one of the handful of interviews which are always conducted with allies of his as well, conveniently. He said that, we'd got Cavani in there, and you think, well, yeah, he had a brilliant end to the 2021 season, but he was declaring himself unfit when the medical staff were declaring him fit. And then his second season, he took the mickey every time. You knew whenever there was going to be an international break, you couldn't count on Cavani being available for the first game back, because he'd always take his time coming back from Uruguay or wherever he'd been playing in South America. So that was always going to be an issue there. But when Ten Hag came in, because Ronaldo had mentally checked out, because he wanted out of the club, he ceased to be an asset as a starter for United. And that was one of the masterstrokes by Ten Hag in his first season, when he dropped Ronaldo against Liverpool and Harry Maguire as well that night. And United were brilliant, and they got their first win under him. And I think it inflicted the first domestic defeat on Klopp's Liverpool that calendar year. It was a hell of a coup, that game. So, but perceptions change. As I said the other day, regarding the FA Cup final post-match press conference, there were a lot of keyboard warriors frothing over the line of questioning from journalists, and there were budding press conference attendants abusing journalists online as well for their line of questioning a few months on. And another journalist challenges Ten Hag at a press conference, and rightly he got the plaudits, because the perception has changed of Ten Hag, and as we all know, fans can be very, very fickle.
I was actually of the opinion that obviously Ronaldo's first season, his return, was a success, but I do believe he did disrupt the team that they were building as well, because you have to play around Ronaldo.
But what were they building? Because this is the myth again. It was this season where, they finished second, they were unbeaten away from home. It was also fake football. And unfortunately, United, they adapted. United adapted to fake football better than most, which should have been a red flag. But because they had rugby enthusiasts who knew each other from the University of Bristol, they decided, give him a new contract. He's out of contract next year. Real Madrid might come in for him. And this is a manager who's still not managed since he was sacked by United.
And there's merit in that. And I think you turn around in the counterpoint as well. There was a fluidity that lacked when Ronaldo was playing, and that was involving Rashford, Marshall, Cavani. But I completely accept your point and agree that Cavani was never fit. He was always injured. Marshall, look what happened. Look at Rashford now. So I think it's definitely a nuanced issue. There's so many different angles I think you can come at it. But there's no denying it. It was a success for Ronaldo, because he just scored goals. And without his goals, the team would have been worse. Yeah. So that's a fact. You can't deny it. I was actually told a story the other day, which is really interesting, a bit of insight into Ten Hag's relationship with Ronaldo at that time. I don't know if it's been reported elsewhere, but it was basically, he was coming into training with his 30 grand or whatever there were, earrings on, really fancy pieces in his ears, really nice jewellery. And each day, Ten Hag would say, take your earrings out. And there was a bit of tension every single day in training. Anyways, and that eventually accumulated in Ronaldo and Ten Hag having a strop. And I think Ten Hag said, look, like, Steve McLaren, you need to sort this out. So he tells him, like, Ronaldo, Cristiano, you can't wear your earrings in training. So Ronaldo just responds by picking up these 30 grand earrings and just throwing them in the bush and marching onto the training ground at Carrington. So that just kind of shows you what was going on at that time between Ten Hag and Ronaldo, and it clearly wasn't a healthy environment, was it? And it boiled over on match days. We all saw it, and it obviously ended up in his exit, and it was quite a dramatic exit at that. His comments on Van Nistelrooy were interesting, Samuel. And there seems to be a theory among fans at the moment that obviously Van Nistelrooy's come in, he had one season in management with PSV, he won the Dutch Cup, then resigned eventually. He had some success with their youth teams. So it's been really interesting to see him come in as a first-team coach. It's been quite exciting for fans to see him return. But as I said, there's been a theory that maybe if Ten Hag gets the axe, Van Nistelrooy comes in, takes over on an interim basis, pardon me, and then perhaps gets the job on a permanent basis. I think that would have merit on an interim basis, but for me, I don't know if you agree, Van Nistelrooy does not have the credentials to manage United on a permanent basis.
I do agree with you, and I say that, having absolutely adored watching Van Nistelrooy when I was younger, and he's one of United's greatest strikers. He's a great person as well. He's just everything about him is impressive, and you can understand United fans buzzing of him coming back to the club because he is one of their greats, and he's someone who really embraced playing for United. He embraces living in Manchester now, as he did as a player as well. But you can't. This is the problem that people at United had in the summer, and a lot of United fans have. They allow the heart to rule the head, and it would be almost like a deluxe Ole Gunnar Solskjaer version, of caretaker version, if you like, and that you've got a club great coming in as a caretaker. And look, they've got a coach from the Netherlands as the incumbent, and there were certainly, I think when they went for Ten Hag, people, myself included, wondered, is he going to have the authority going into that dressing room, having just been in the Netherlands, where it's you're on easy street, even though you are managing a big club in Ajax. But Ten Hag did dispel a lot of those issues. But as time has gone on, his attachment to Dutch coaches or Dutch footballers or players schooled in the Netherlands has not served him well. And that's why I was surprised in the summer that they signed 3 players who were born in the Netherlands. Obviously, Mazraoui is a Morocco international, but he was born in the Netherlands. Because I just expected the new regime, they would completely separate themselves from the previous regime. Yet, if you look at the 3 transfer windows, you'd think that nothing has changed at a hierarchical level at United because of this personal connection that Ten Hag has to a lot of the signings that have been made during his time there. Coming back to Van Nistelrooy, it was always when a player manager of that profile comes in and he's the assistant, you immediately think, well, he's a number one. He's a big name. He was looking to possibly take over as Burnley manager, which I think would have been a good move for Burnley, certainly. So I know he's gone a level above, literally coming in as a first team assistant at United, but it does risk that dynamic possibly of they had it a little bit with Ryan Giggs when he was assistant to Louis van Gaal, because the consensus was that Giggs would take over from Van Gaal after 3 years, and obviously that didn't happen. And you've seen it at other places as well, where there's the number 2 looms, the number 2 coach, of course. And it was a bit of an issue with England at the World Cup in 2006, with Steve McLaren still assisting Sven-Göran Eriksson. Yet everyone knew going into that World Cup, McLaren was going to be Eriksson's replacement after the tournament. And England clearly back then did not have the coping mechanisms to deal with that scrutiny and that pressure. Other national teams have done. I think probably Germany have gone into a tournament and it's been known that the assistant was going to take over from the first team coach. I think that might have been the case with Klinsmann and Joachim Löw at the 2006 World Cup as well, coincidentally. But people are looking at it already, and United fans who I speak to, they're saying, it's a matter of time until Van Nistelrooy takes caretaker charge. And
everyone's talking about it. That's in personality.
Yeah, and
they mention it.
Yeah, and Ten Hag could do without that, and clearly all those coaching changes in the summer, he would not have initiated them. Mitchell van der Gaag was his right-hand man for 5 years, and they said, Mitchell wants to go out and be a manager. If you're leaving your post in July, that is essentially the worst time to leave a job as a coach if you want to go into management. You go at the end of the season, you go in May, and you make people aware of it. When Rui Faria stepped down as Jose Mourinho's assistant, that was known before the end of the 2017-18 season. If you're going in July, nobody's looking for what club out there is looking for a manager in July. They want their manager sorted by early June at the latest, so that they're ready for pre-season. So that didn't really stack up. And obviously Rene Hake knows, from what we heard on the tour, it sounded like Van Nistelrooy was more of an appointment from the hierarchy, that they wanted that to happen, and they told Ten Hag that was happening. So already you wonder, well, are they even looking at him as a caretaker? And there was an interesting quote from Dan Ashworth, who gave a really enlightening, it's probably thrown under the radar a bit, but he gave a very enlightening interview to I think it was the Express and Star a couple of years ago on a podcast, probably when he was on gardening leave at Brighton. And he said in it, and bearing in mind this was only 2 years ago, he said, if you're not prepared for your manager to leave, you're not doing your job. So we know for certainty that United have a plan in place if they decide to sack Ten Hag. And it wouldn't be a surprise if Van Nistelrooy or Rene Hake are part of that plan, i.e. taking over in a caretaker basis. I don't think that they'll be able to get by with another Ralph Rangnick interim appointment as they experimented with nearly 3 years ago. But clearly with Van Nistelrooy, where he's a name, where he's got such a huge profile, and frankly he's going to be more popular among the match goers than Ten Hag is, because of what he did for United as a player. I mean, we were at the Community Shield and his face appeared on the big screen, and you'd hear United fans shouting "rude." They
even after the
when he came out at Old Trafford.
Yeah, and they were going down the tunnel after that win. I mean, there was footage on the club's social media account, and Ten Hag got applause as they left. But when Van Nistelrooy walked through, it was rapturous, and as you said, chanting his name. There's a lot of love there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I experienced it firsthand when I was younger, just how adored Van Nistelrooy was, and United fans fell over head over heels for him very, very quickly, and that bond was pretty ardent for the 5 years he was at the club. So it's easy for United even now just to compile a statement as to if on should they dismiss Ten Hag's anytime soon. You could even do a statement for them. It'd be Rui Van Nistelrooy will take over as caretaker manager while we go through the process of appointing a permanent replacement for Eric.
It seems like a good bet.
It almost seems too easy in a way. I mean, there was when I think when Solskjaer was sacked, or was about to be sacked on the Saturday night, I was told that they were looking at Darren Fletcher to take over, and did that story, and then others also did as well through their own sourcing. And then, of course, on the Sunday morning, it was Michael Carrick. And I don't know for certain what changed along the way, but there was a suggestion that they found out that Fletcher didn't have the coaching badges, and so they couldn't make him caretaker, but Carrick did, so they could make him the caretaker. As it turns out, the guy who possibly should have been made caretaker was maybe Kieran McKenna, given the great job he's done at Ipswich. But that's a recent example where United have not been averse to caretaker appointments. They did it with Ryan Giggs for 4 games. Carrick had it for 3 games. But I don't think they can go down the interim road. This hierarchy really needs to divorce themselves from the past.
Sorry for interrupting. My browser's about to close in 15 seconds, so I think we'll have to end it there. It's popped up. I can't do anything about it. So thanks for your time, and thanks to listeners.
It's like
3, 2, 1.